Hey everybody, welcome to Composer Talks with White Bear PR. When I first saw the documentary Apollo 11, I was actually on a flight to Europe from LA and I was riveted. Most of the time you're watching movies on airplanes, you're kind of paying attention. There's a lot of activity happening. People are trying to take your drink order, but I could not look away. And part of that reason is the riveting score by Matt Morton. And I'm super excited to have Matt on the show with me today. Welcome, Matt.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Hey, welcome. Thanks for being here. It's Matt Morton. He's an award-winning composer, multi-instrumentalist, and music producer. His feature-length scores include the multiple award-winning film Apollo 11, Todd Douglas Miller's Emmy-winning Sundance documentary Dinosaur 13, Scarring the Fish, and John Urbano's Panama documentary Beauty of the Fight. Now, Matt, you won multiple awards for your music in Apollo 11, didn't you? I think it was Cinema Eye Honors and the Critics' Choice as well, correct?
Yep, two best score wins. That was pretty awesome.
That's
Very humbling
incredible.
considering who I was up against. So yeah, that was awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. Congratulations. That's truly exciting, especially as a relative newcomer into this industry. You're kind of, making some waves. That's incredible.
Yeah, yeah. Especially being an outsider geographically coming from Columbus, Ohio. So
Yeah, exactly. Not New York or LA, but Ohio of
yeah,
all places.
yeah.
Now, you've collaborated with director Todd Douglas Miller on several projects. How did you two meet? And can you talk a little bit about your collaboration?
Sure. So we actually have known each other almost all our lives. We played soccer as kids, and then he was on a different side of town, so we went to different middle schools, but we went to the same high school, and ended up forming a band together. And so he was a singer, and I played guitar, and so we started collaborating artistically, almost 25 years ago. So he went off to film school after graduation. I went to Denison University and studied there, but really I was studying being in a rock band. I started a band the first day I was on campus, and that band stayed together for 9 years, and we toured all over the place and kind of gave it the old college try even after graduation from college. And around the end of that band period, I was starting to dabble in composing, little web films and little commercials and stuff like that for local businesses. And that's around the same time that Todd was getting out of film school and cutting his teeth on some commercials. And he was starting to do some of his first original work, not through a post house or anything. And I started scoring his stuff from then on. So we've been working together for about 20 years as far as the scoring goes. And so, yeah,
Wow.
we made a lot of stuff that nobody saw, and thank God they didn't see it, because you got to get a lot of bad writing out of you and bad editing and all that kind of stuff before you get to the good stuff. So first time anyone paid any attention to us was when we got Dinosaur 13 into Sundance, and then Lionsgate and CNN Films bought that film, and it went into theaters, and then it actually won an Emmy for outstanding science and technology programming for its broadcast on CNN. So.
So, having worked with somebody for so long, is there a kind of a betterment to your workflow and your communication? Do you think there's a shorthand that's happening now in your projects?
Absolutely. Yeah. We have spent the long hours talking on the phone about what films and scores we like and don't like, and approaches we like and don't like. And yeah, he can say, make it stabby strings, and I know that he means staccato or spiccato, short attacks and stuff like that. I know he doesn't want, you know, um, Alfred Hitchcock stabby style of strings. But yeah, it also, I'm very helped by the fact that he's very musical, and we had, our very first collaboration was musical. So he thinks of his films almost like a musician would, and I'd like to think that I try to approach scoring like a director editor would do. And so I think we really, um, it's like a tennis volley. Like, I think if I have the idea first, I give it to him and he's got something to cut with. Or if he gives me something and it's got either me or someone else temped in, then I know that that's just a starting point, and I will work something up and then send it back over the net to him, and vice versa, and we'll just keep that going. And he's very open to ideas, so he's kind of the ideal collaborator. Um, Not only the fact that we've known each other for so long, but I just have so much respect for his skill.
Yeah, absolutely. And you guys worked on a movie called The Last Steps together about Apollo 17. Did you feel that that was the dry run leading up to Apollo 11?
Yes, very much so. So that was about a 30-minute cut that we did back in 2016, and like Apollo 11, it was all archival. You're only seeing December 1972 footage for the most part. I think there was a little bit right before and a little bit right after, but yeah, basically you're just seeing history. And for that one, I used kind of any instrument or effect that I wanted to. I just gave myself all the colors in the big Crayola pack and just used whatever I wanted to. And I love that score, but what it did was also kind of gave me an idea, because that score juxtaposed some very modern sounds against that period footage, which is cool. But it also kind of planted the idea in my head of, okay, we've got an all archival doc, but this modern music's kind of taken me out of it in some spots. What if we got another shot at it and we got to maybe make the music marry up a little bit better historically, so that you were seeing and hearing the same historical period, and you'd be able to jump in and feel like you're in a full time machine the whole time. And so that's what we got a chance to do with Apollo 11. I decided pretty early on to only use instruments and effects that were around at the time of the mission, so that if a composer had the bankroll and the means and stuff to be able to have a big Moog modular synth like in the back, and a mellotron and a Hammond organ and a Leslie speaker and old tape echoes and stuff like that, all the sounds that you hear in that film could have been made at the time of the mission, which I think helps. It helps you get into it and stay in it. And I chose the synth because I was looking for sort of an analog to the fact of, at the time, NASA and the space program were at the cutting edge of science and technology, and a lot of their discoveries led to all kinds of advances in science and technology and aerospace and all that kind of stuff. I was trying to see what was going on in music technology. Were there any new instruments at that point that were being invented that then had big effects on the future of music? And for me, that answer was the synthesizer. So that's why that's a main voice in that film. And also the analog synth, even though it's been around for so long now, it still sounds futuristic, and all of the space footage looks very futuristic too. So it married up aesthetically pretty well too.
Yeah, absolutely. The one thing I was really striking about the score is that it felt so modern against the archival footage. But of course, as you said, it is from instruments of that era. And I think also what was juxtaposing about it all is that we've seen the Apollo 11 moon landing numerous times in films, and it's usually very orchestral, soaring, horns and strings and whatever. So what made you decide to not go in that direction that has been done so many times? I mean, it seems so obvious, but
Yeah.
obviously not so obvious. So can you talk a little
Yeah.
bit about
Yeah. Well, it's daunting to try and score something that's been covered so much, like Apollo 11. I mean, it seems like every composer worth their salt has had a swing at it in the last 50 years. And especially, people like James Horner and Brian Eno and there's just, the list goes on. So it's kind of like, first off, it's daunting because you're like, how do I underscore and celebrate the importance of such an important evolutionary step for life on Earth to be able to, it's kind of like the first fish that walked on land. It's like, how do you put into music how important that is, that life evolved on the Earth and eventually gained the technological expertise to be able to leave it and go to another planet, step foot on it, and come back and not die. That's amazing on its own. So that's a big task. But also, yeah, how do you carve out your own kind of unique spot in that pantheon of composers? And for me, it was kind of like having the benefit of seeing what everyone else did. One of the things that doesn't come across is that, yeah, we know the story of Apollo 11. We all know they got back safe. But a lot of the music kind of took that for granted. Not all of it. There's a lot of good tension in a lot of those scores, but I wanted to kind of really underscore the danger that was going on. The fact that they're sitting on the top of a 6.5 million pound, 36-story, essentially missile, right? I mean, a lot of the technology came from the military too. So, you know, a million things could go wrong. Buzz Aldrin famously says, like, when people asks you, you know, what were you what was going through your head on the launch pad, and like, you know, he said, it's so great. He's like, well, I was thinking about the fact that I'm sitting in a vehicle, this gigantic vehicle full of like all this fuel, and it was built by the lowest bidder. You know, it was a government contract, and the people who won the contract are the ones who could do it for the cheapest. So not always the so it had to be terrifying. So you know, my score was trying to do two things. One, underscore the importance of what you're seeing, which I put as one of the most important things not just humans have ever done, but life in general has ever done. And two, to underscore the danger of it and to try and build that suspense into the telling of a story that everyone already knows the ending. And my hope, like, you know, the best compliments I got were when people said, like, I was on the edge of my seat every time, you know, every time they did a maneuver, you know, every time they did separation and docking or lunar orbit insertion or the powered descent or, you know, whatever, they were always worried that something was going to blow up. And I was like, yes, that's amazing, because they were worried about that too. You know,
Yeah.
everybody in mission control was worried about that. And, you know, Apollo 13 very famously went very wrong. Apollo 12 was struck by lightning when it was lifting off, and all their computers went blank. So all their telemetry and guidance and everything went wrong. So luckily somebody in some back room that knew the manual backwards and forwards famously told them to flip the switch. I think it was have them switch SCE to auxiliary, and that fixed it. It brought all the computers back on. So it's like, I don't know. It could have gone much worse. So
yeah, no kidding. So Apollo 11 does not use a narrator. It's famously just done with archival footage. And most documentaries, you know, do have a narrator, and they're feeding you lots of information. So the score serves a different purpose. You're supporting the lead character of the narrator, or the talking head, so to speak. But Apollo 11 plays out really differently. Do you feel the score had to be that narrator in a sense?
Well, we did have a couple of resources that were narrator-like. So you had Cronkite speaking about the importance of everything, just talking about the, you know, the burdens and the hopes of all mankind on the, you know, on the shoulders of the astronauts beforehand. And then you also had the public address, or, you know, the public affairs officer for NASA also sort of sitting in mission control and listening to all of the astronaut and technical jargon, and then kind of translating that into what people would understand in the outside world. So we did use that a little bit, but yes, the music did have to kind of carry a little bit of a load. And I tried to communicate a lot of things, whether it be, the main one was tension, of course. The importance of, if they talk about it in Apollo 13, where like the spaceship separates and then the command module turns around and then pulls the lunar module out of the service module. If they would have messed that up, the mission would have been dead. So I really, ratcheted up some of the score almost sounds like it would work in a horror movie, I think. But, one of the ways I tried to use it was like, for example, in the lunar orbit insertion. So they get to the moon and they need to go into lunar orbit, but they're going so fast that they'd get into orbit and then they'd skip off into outer space. So they had to actually, turn the spacecraft around backwards so that the engine was facing forwards, and fire the engine so that they would slow down enough to not fall out of orbit. So what I did is I actually, I knew the speed that they were going before they did the burn, and I knew the speed that they were going after it. I computed that percentage, and I actually slowed down the tempo of the music at the same ratio. While they did the burn, I just slowed the tempo down to, I think it was like 26% or something like that. So I don't remember the original tempos, but I made it so that it was exactly proportional to the speed, deceleration that they made there too. So it's that's a literal translation of what's going on the screen.
Yeah.
And that's just one
Wow.
example. But
That's incredibly fascinating and incredibly nerdy, and I love it. I love the science and music component of the score on Apollo 11. But there's a very personal element in the score. You used your niece's heartbeat. Can you just talk
yeah,
about that choice and why it's how it's important to you in the score?
sure. So, my sister was my sister and her partner were pregnant with their first child, and she hadn't been born yet. But she sent me a text, and attached to that text was her sonogram. So I took that recording, being the musician and that I am. I was like, oh man, that's so cool. I'm gonna like. My first idea was to just hide it like an Easter egg in the film for no reason at all. But then I thought, here we are. We're looking back 50 years. What's the point of it? It's been told a million times. I think one of the main reasons to look backward in history is to look forward. You got to know where you've been, so that you know where you're headed. And I wanted, all the footage was archival. All the music instruments were all old. But I wanted a little seed of the future in there. And so you can hear it in the, what is it? There's a cue early on when they fire the engines to go to the moon, to leave Earth orbit and to go to the moon. And right in there, like I cut the recording up so that there's a heartbeat on every single quarter note. So every downbeat basically. And then at the very end, I put the sonogram in there, just completely natural, not messed around with at all. And basically, I wanted her to represent future space travelers, the future generation. What are they going to do next? Okay, we went to the moon in 69 through 72. Where are they going to go? The SpaceX launch last week was really awesome. And it, finally we're launching astronauts off of American soil again. That's great. But where are we going to go next? Hopefully we go back to the moon. Hopefully we get to Mars. Hopefully we figure out, how to shield ourselves from radiation and become a multiplanetary species, because it's only a matter of time before the next KT event comes along, which was the asteroid that impacted 66.5 million years ago and wiped out the dinosaurs, which was my other big movie, I guess. But they're all kind of coming together. But yeah, I mean, we need to think ahead, because the universe is a dangerous place, and right now we have all our eggs in the same basket here on Earth. But
Yeah.
it's all about the next generation. So I wanted it to not just be a look backward at Apollo 11, but also a look forward to the next generation.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for taking the time today to be on Composer Talks with White Bear PR. And I hope everybody watching who hasn't seen the movie can go out and see it immediately, because it is incredible. And as Matt said, even though you know the outcome of this mission, you still are just gripped to the action of what's happening. And it's just incredible to watch it happen in real time, as far as this is actual footage that they captured. And so I felt like I learned something while watching it, even though I already knew what was going to happen. Anyways, thanks, Matt.
It's
Thank you so
awesome.
much for being here.
Thanks so much for having me.